This video was brought to you by the lovely members of my Patreon. So in my last video about all of this YouTube beauty drama, I talked about how Tati Westbrook developed a relationship with Jeffree Star, someone who's been accused of racism several times. And around the time when they first released their collaboration video together, Jeffree Star was calling Jackie Aina an irrelevant rat after she said that she would no longer support his products because of his racism.
Jackie, I'm sorry that I did not do the right thing and walk away from him then. I should have not been blind to the reasons behind the accusations of his racism.
Now, when I talk about all of this YouTube stuff, I really like to do it in a way that recontextualizes it in a way where we can start having conversations about what we do in our daily lives. I think a lot of this is petty high school stuff, but I think that within this conversation, there is a microcosm about how oftentimes white people will express apathy towards anti-Black racism. In my previous video, I said this. Now, contrary to popular belief, I don't personally believe that every white person is a racist. But what I will say is that I believe pretty much every white person has a relationship with a racist that is more valuable than any relationship they will ever have with a Black person. In Tati's apology, she said this about Jeffree Star.
As time went on, I learned that being friends with Jeffree Star was like being friends with a lion. Yes, he may have been dangerous, but he was always really kind to me.
And for me, that really drove home the point that white people and Black people seem to have very different lines when it comes to tolerating racists. And as I've said in every single video about this subject, I definitely believe that people can change, but I also believe firmly that you don't need to be there for somebody on their journey and path towards change. Shane Dawson monetized blackface, and I personally don't believe that I need to be there to pat him on the back for apparently no longer being racist because he says so. People are spending an awful lot of time talking about cancel culture and how people are trying to cancel Jeffree Star and cancel Shane Dawson, but let's be really honest here. Jeffree Star and Shane Dawson will continue to be far more successful than any Black influencer on this platform. And even though Jeffree Star and Shane Dawson sat down, wrote a racist script, sat in front of a camera and filmed it, edited and uploaded it and posted it, and then made money from it, there are still people who are going to say that, well, they just made a mistake and they just slipped up and that we should forgive them. And to be honest with you guys, for years I've watched this happen and I've pondered why exactly that is. I understand somebody saying something innocuous, but for me, their racism seems fairly deliberate, and I don't entirely understand why so many people seem to make an excuse for them time and time again. But when I ponder and think about why that is and why these people continue to be supported, I realize that it's the same exact reason why people are hesitant to end their relationships with racists, because to some degree, they see themselves in them. So my long-term subscribers know that I was in a 5-year relationship with a white man who lived in Orange County. And for me, living in Orange County was such a culture shock because I had never been in an area that was so predominantly white. I grew up in a predominantly POC neighborhood. My neighborhood was predominantly Asian. We were one of the only Black families, but for the most part, the community was pretty much people of color. Now, when I was younger, there were more white people, but as time went on, the white people all seemed to move out. And since breaking up with my ex and moving to Los Angeles, I've lived in a couple of different types of neighborhoods. The first place I lived in was predominantly Black, and now the area that I currently live in is predominantly Mexican. It's really common for people to congregate around people who share their culture. Sometimes this is by choice, but sometimes it's by design. Years ago, I did a pretty in-depth video about whiteness, and one of the things that I discussed in that video were these racially restrictive housing covenants. A housing covenant was essentially an agreement that you would sign if you were purchasing land. And oftentimes in these covenants, there would be a clause that essentially said that the only people who can live on this land are white people. Now, I know that this probably blows a lot of people's minds if you haven't done a lot of research into systemic racism. These housing covenants actually came after the Great Migration of blacks from the South, and in 1917, there was a court ruling that essentially gave space for these types of agreements to be made. These covenants were often neighborhood-wide, and they were so common that by 1940, 80% of the property in both Los Angeles and Chicago had racially restrictive covenants. And these covenants would often say in very plain English that they would not allow black people to live in this area. When I talk about systemic racism, this is exactly the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Things that reinforce racial inequality and reinforce segregation, even though it's been abolished. There are still so many places in this country that are still racially segregated because of things like housing covenants. And this is just one of the many examples of how systemic racism still continues to permeate through our country. I got this comment on my previous video and I wanted to read it to you. If you call everything racist to get your oppression points, you're going to be treated poorly because you're trying to get unearned and undeserved benefits from being born some way. It's icky, to be honest. One of the things I'm coming to recognize in time is that the vast majority of white people are raised in white communities, they have white neighbors, they have white friends, and they can go a really, really long period of time in their life without ever interacting with a person of color. It's very easy to see racism and the conversations around racism as just this massive conspiracy theory when you're not around people of color and therefore you don't really see the actual impact of racism. In fact, when I made my point in my last video about why people are more willing to defend the white racist in their life than they are their black friends, a lot of people said, well, they just don't have black friends. My father grew up in Boston during an incredibly racially segregated time. And if you guys know anything about Boston, you know that it is a city that has a really deep history of racism and segregation. When my father would tell me stories of his childhood, one of the stories that he would often tell is that it was really common for white police officers to grab him and his friends, drag them into an alleyway, and beat them because they could. Because they knew that they were beating up little black kids and that they could get away with it. And this was just part of how he was experiencing the world. He was experiencing the world in a way where the white cops in his neighborhood could not be trusted, where the white cops in the neighborhood could get away with abusing him. Now, a white person raised in a white community where their interactions with the police are entirely positive might look at something like the Ferguson uprising, for example, and not entirely understand why that's happening, not entirely understand why there's so much anger and why people are, as people like to say, destroying their own communities, right? But what they might not understand is that a lot of the uprising against police is coming because of decades of abuse that went unchecked, decades of racism. There's often this disconnect because racism like that of what my father experienced is not seen by white people who live in bastions of whiteness. Now, in my first video about Shane Dawson, I spoke about how people are canceling each other for racism, but not really talking about the actual impact of anti-blackness and what its impact is not only on their black audience members, but also on their white fans who see these performances of anti-blackness and with time start to dehumanize black people more and more and more in their minds. A lot of white people seem to see racism as a simple ideological or moral dilemma. Only bad people are racist, and if this person was nice to me, how can they be racist?
Yes, he may have been dangerous, but he was always really kind to me.
I think because anti-blackness isn't something that white people experience directly, it's very, very easy for them to dismiss it as a simple disagreement. People defending Shane Dawson and Jeffree Star really do boil it down to grease paint or just a collection of words. And they dismiss it because to them, that's not as bad as burning a cross on somebody's lawn. Now, even though to me, painting your face black and acting like a black stereotype is obviously racism and obviously harkens back to a time where black people were dehumanized through blackface, I think that it's harder for a lot of white people to see that. I think that a lot of white people, they look at things like painting your face black as just sort of this innocuous thing. Saying the N-word is sort of this innocuous thing. But for me, I see it for what it is, because I understand that it's those sorts of notions that allowed those police officers to feel like they could abuse my father, that they could be racist and get away with it. So when I hear racism, no matter how subtle it is, I hear the violence behind it. So even if somebody's being racist against a minority other than Black people, I don't want anything to do with that person. I don't. I literally can't justify why I would give that person any degree of consideration. I don't want to be around them. I don't want them in my life. But if I'm to believe what a lot of people said in my previous video, it really seems like part of being white is having these unavoidable relationships with racists. So in these videos, I really try my best to speak very precisely, and sometimes that means that there is nuance that gets lost in what I said. And I think that some people misunderstood, or I didn't make it clear enough, that when I said the point about how people are more willing to defend the racist in their life that they have a relationship with over their Black friend, I was mostly just pointing out the importance of that relationship rather than saying that you should cut off absolutely everyone. I understand why you would want to maintain a relationship with your racist relatives. You know, you don't choose your family. You are often born into a family, and you can't control if your family is racist. Now, in this conversation about Tati and Jeffree, Tati Westbrook and Jeffree Star are friends. They're not family, they're not related. So for me, I have a hard time understanding why, if you're somebody who claims to be allied against racism, you would look at someone like Jeffree Star and fight for them in a way that you would not fight for, especially a Black person who is more in your realm of makeup, another woman who's on YouTube making makeup content. I don't really get that. When you are someone like Tati Westbrook, who sees a racist be racist, and you choose to dismiss it or say that it's not that bad because it doesn't personally affect you, I think that that smells a little bit. And I think that once you do that, you can no longer claim to be some sort of anti-racist allied with people of color against white supremacy. I don't think you can do that when you're holding on so tightly to those friendships, right? But parents, I think that's a little different. Now, I'm going to once again ask for the honesty of my white audience. I want you guys to be honest and not get defensive when I ask you guys this question. How many times has a white person who is racist turned to you and said something incredibly racist and made the assumption that you would either be okay with it or that you would agree with them because you're white? How many times has that happened? How many times has a racist looked at your skin color and just assumed that you were racist just like they were? One of my biggest frustrations with white liberals is that I've had these experiences with them where they will come to me and they will tell me every single thing their racist uncle or their racist coworker or their racist friend said to them. They will just tell me the whole shebang. And for some reason, they think I want to hear a story of them listening to somebody be racist and doing absolutely nothing about it. It seems like being anti-racist is something that they only express around people of color. It almost seems like they don't actively talk about this stuff. It almost seems like they're not actively having these conversations with their white friends, with their family members, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not a white person, so maybe I don't fully get this, but to me, being anti-racist is pretty easy. It seems pretty simple. But what I'm getting from a lot of the conversations we've been having is that a lot of white people don't stand up to racists because they fear being alienated by them. Now, if you're familiar with any of my LGBT content, you probably know that I personally think that when it comes to standing up to your family, you really do need to do that when you're safe. But for those of you who aren't relying on the racist in your life for a place to lay your head, I'll be honest, I'm a bit perplexed by this. Look, I've been speaking openly about racism on YouTube for a very long time, and if there's one thing I've unfortunately come to accept, it's that a lot of white people who engage in racism are not gonna listen to me. They're not gonna look at me as a Black girl and be like, yeah, she's the one to listen to. They're gonna wanna listen to another white person. So it's safe to say that I think part of being anti-racist is being that insufferable person at family gatherings who does not allow racism to fester. Because to be completely honest with you guys, I think that a lot of people are racist and continue to be racist because no one calls them out for it. It's easy for a white person to dismiss a black person calling out their racism, but if someone who they care about says, hey, this is wrong, you're being hurtful, I have friends who are this thing that you're trying to dehumanize, I think that they'd be way more willing to listen. But a lot of white people seem afraid of doing that because it could potentially alienate them. And if they turn their backs on their racist family members, wouldn't that leave them without education and put them right into a position where they play right into the hand of people who share their beliefs? A common argument that I've heard is that when I call out people for being racist, I'm actually potentially pushing them towards being even more racist. There are a lot of people that said, well, if we don't forgive Jeffree Star, if we don't forgive Shane Dawson, what would their motivation even be to change or to be better or to not be racist? And it's really interesting to me how a lot of people seem to need my participation or people of color's participation in general in order for them to not be racist. That's wild to me. One of the most annoying things somebody can say to me is that when I call people out for being racist, I should just educate them, because I've spent so much time on the internet educating people about their racism. I mean, when Shane Dawson was first getting called out for his blackface, I took my frustration and I transformed it into an educational video about blackface, telling you exactly what it is, giving you the history, giving you the impact, and just laying it out in plain English in a very digestible way. I have worked tirelessly to give people the education. But one of the things that I recognize is, again, when I try to do the education, they don't listen to me as much. These people are more willing to listen to a white person say exactly what I'm saying. And here's the thing, there are people who don't know any better. There are people who, because they were raised in bastions of whiteness, because they've only ever been around other white people, they can say and do racist things and not even realize that they're doing it. And they haven't had that like really critical conversation with a person that they care about that will help them understand why what they're doing is hurtful and why what they're engaging in is wrong. I'm just gonna be really blunt with you guys. It's been a little frustrating for me to watch people act like grown adults don't know that blackface is racist or saying the N-word is racist. So many people would rather believe that Shane Dawson and Jeffree Star engaged in racism out of pure ignorance and they just didn't know no better. These people deliberately engaged with anti-blackness in order to be edgy because they knew it was offensive, because they knew that it would get a reaction. That's why they did it. They know exactly what they were doing. They knew that they were citing racism. People are talking about Jeffree Star and Shane Dawson getting canceled right now. Give it a year. Give it a year. Give it less than that. They'll be out there doing things like nothing ever happened, and y'all will still be supporting them. Y'all will still be supporting them. And then you'll still come to me and say, well, Kat, you're just making a big deal of this racism stuff. I just wanted to point something out in case you haven't noticed at this point. I'm black, and I just can't muster the amount of leeway and sympathy you guys have for these YouTubers, you know? If I see someone being racist, it's just really easy for me to walk away. It's been really frustrating for me to be a black person attempting to help people understand racism and experience the amount of racism that I experience, just having this platform and having these conversations and knowing that that's where I sit, and watching these people who have been racist and have done racist shit get love, support, makeup releases, documentaries, all this stuff. It's been hard. It's been hard because I know very innately that I will never be given that amount of leeway. As a black person who experiences racism, I will never be given the amount of leeway as a white blogger who expresses racism. I think that black people and white people start with a very different script, right? When you're a black person, anti-blackness is very clear and obvious. I look at a person doing blackface and saying the N-word and I say that's racist and I move on, and for me it's really easy for me to move on from that. But I think that for a white person, you could look at a white person doing blackface and saying the N-word and say, well, maybe they just didn't know any better, because you've been there too. You've been there in a position where you've engaged in racism and you didn't even have the first clue that what you were engaging in was potentially hurtful to other people. You didn't know. So I guess when white people are unpacking their own anti-blackness, it's even harder for them to unpack another person's. I think if you're a white person allied against racism, it's truly your job to, when you're maintaining those relationships with those racists in your life, whether they're family or friends or partners, whatever, it truly is your job to try to educate them out of it. But keep in mind that they might just be racist. They might just be racist. They might not just lack the information. They might just be racist. And at the end of the day, you have to live with that. I think that you should be fully engaged in having that conversation and having it in a way where you show empathy towards the people that are learning, but you also show that you don't put up with this bullshit. I think that that's honestly the best way to do it. Anyway, I am exhausted, so I'm gonna go, but I just want to share those thoughts with you guys. Hopefully you guys got something from them. I like to sort of have these conversations to help people figure stuff out. And I'm very thankful that you guys have listened and that you guys have applied it to your own life. That truly means an awful lot to me. So thank you so much for being here and for doing the thing. Anyway, I will talk to you guys later. Bye.